This is the 4th episode of the Peace and Design series. There are 5 episodes with people who are dedicated to building peace from different angles and countries. From Colombia, El Salvador, Mexico, and the US, we will listen to key voices in order to understand this complex problem. We have 4 interviews and a live panel that we hosted online. We thought about and recorded this series with Kevin Fonseca and Santiago de Francisco Vela from the University of the Andes. In my research for designers and projects in the intersection of design and peace, I stumbled into an exhibition, Designing Peace in the Cooper-Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. Designing Peace explored the unique role design can play in pursuing peace. Visitors will encounter a wide range of design responses from around the world that look at ways to create and sustain a more durable peace, and will be encouraged to consider their own agency in designing peace through interactive installations, quiet moments of reflection, and opportunities for practical action. When I read that description, I thought, yes, let's interview the curator. In this interview, we talk with Cynthia Smith, the curator of this exhibition and a specialist in the area. She's the curator of socially responsible design in the museum.
My name is Santiago de Francisco Vela.
My name is Mariana Salgado. This is Diseño y Diáspora.
My name is Cynthia Smith. I am the curator of socially responsible design at Cooper-Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. Just a little bit about the museum. It is the design museum for the world's largest research, education, and museum complex, the Smithsonian Institution. We are one of 2 Smithsonian museums located in New York City. We're the only museum in the United States devoted exclusively to historic and contemporary design. We have a wonderful collection that spans 30 centuries and contains well over 200,000 objects, from exquisite textiles to digital design works. And our mission is to educate, inspire, and empower people through design. And we do this through a wide range of programs, public programs, exhibitions, publications, and interactive resources. And for both of you and for the listeners, I hope you'll visit us the next time you're in New York.
Sure. And Cynthia, what did you study? How someone becomes the curator of socially responsible design?
Well, my background, I studied industrial design as an undergraduate. And then when I got out of school, I moved to New York, and I started working in architecture, working with cultural institutions. But parallel to that, I was getting involved in community organizing and politics. At one point, I actually ran for office. I didn't win. I ran against a widow. Don't run against a widow, you lose. But I was able to work on issues around gaining access to civil rights, et cetera, expanding civil rights, both at a local, a state level, and national level. And so what happened, I came to a point in my career where I was trying to bring those 2 worlds together. So what did I do? I went back to school. I applied to a number of different graduate schools throughout the U.S. and landed at Harvard at the Kennedy School of Government. They have a mid-career program. These are people, by the title of it, where they're midway through their careers. And so that was a real wonderful way for me to be introduced to all kinds of issues. The whole idea behind the Kennedy School is to do public good. And with the mid-career program, there were over 200 people from all over the world, from cardiac surgeons to diplomats to filmmakers to executive directors of nonprofits, to someone like me, a designer, who were coming together to see how we could improve the public good. And I thought I was going to come back to New York and work at a city level. I was interested in urban issues. And what happened for me is I was introduced to all these ideas from across the globe. And when I came back to New York, I was introduced to this idea for the first exhibition I organized. I met the curatorial director, Cooper-Hewitt, who had been in conversation with Paul Pollack, who was the head of International Development Enterprises. And there was this real movement going on across the globe where people were using design. They might not be trained as designers, but they were working in co-creation with people to help people emerge out of poverty. And that's when I organized my first exhibition, which had quite a provocative title. It was called Design for the Other 90%. That was a bit of a misnomer. It was actually, the work was really about people working in co-creation to come up with low-cost, locally made devices that really address poverty around the world. And it was groundbreaking at the time. It was 2007, created an international conversation. Generally, professional designers at that point were thinking about that kind of design, challenged people to think about it in a different way. And in fact, from my perspective, was a bit of a mirror on what was already beginning to happen across the world. And I have to tell you, I think it occurred because of the Millennial Development Goals. I don't know if you both remember this, and it was in 2000, they had established the Millennial Development Goals, and it was focused on helping people emerge out of poverty. And the combination of that with the ascent of the internet, where people could communicate much more readily, enabled this kind of grassroots movement to take hold. And even though it had early roots in the 1960s and 70s with Victor Papanek and E.F. Schumacher, it really was taking hold across the globe at that time.
So we are here because we wanted to talk about your recently curated exhibition, Design and Peace. So we want to listen a little bit about the decision. Why do you want to do an exhibition on peace and design?
Well, this is the fifth exhibition in this humanitarian design series where I put together exhibitions and publications. And one of the, after looking internationally at how design and designers were working with people to emerge out of poverty, I also looked at a large exhibition that we installed at the United Nations headquarters here in New York on informal settlements. I was realizing that I was looking outward across the globe, and I hadn't been looking back within the United States. And so I organized an exhibition. It was entitled By the People Designing a Better America, that looked at this intersection of poverty, prosperity, innovation, and design here in the U.S. And so I traveled all over the U.S. looking at areas where there was multi-generational poverty and how designers were working kind of across, ideological divides. This was a very contentious time when I did my research. And what I discovered is that people were working together to help their neighborhoods and their communities. And so I asked myself, this is very refreshing. The rhetoric at the time within the United States was very, very heated. And yet here people were talking to each other locally. So that was really wonderful to see and to be able to organize an exhibition that focused on that kind of work. And so I asked myself, began to brew at that time, what if we took this to a different scale an international scale. So I asked myself, and this was really the driving research question I had, what might be possible if society were to design for peace? And that's where I began my inquiry. And it's still kind of the larger overarching question that I hope people think about, museum visitors or people who read the book, think about, young designers, peacekeepers, peace builders, think about when they encounter this work.
This is amazing what you're telling us, because this whole path that you have, let's say, discovered during the years working on social innovation and arriving at this topic of design for peace have taken you. But I just wonder, what have you learned from it? What are the take-ons that you have learned from researching and meeting all these designers or people working for peace?
Obviously, there was a lot that I discovered, but a couple that really stand out to me. I always put together this international advisory committee for all my exhibitions, and this particular one was made up of kind of half peace builders and half designers. And we convened a 2-hour conversation and just talking about the direction of the exhibition and what we wanted to make sure that we covered, were there any gaps. And one of the items that kind of surfaced in this conversation between these kind of different sets of people was that peace building and design are similar dynamic processes. So both use engagement, trust building, if you think about it, communication, iteration, and understanding context. And that was really a revelation, I think, to both the peace builders and the designers, how there was such an overlap in the dynamic process both use. And I would say the other thing actually emerged out of collecting of potential design works to include in the exhibition. And this often happens to me. I have this, and I'm not sure if this is true for all curators, but it's how I put together my exhibitions. I throw a really wide net, which means that I start to talk to all kinds of different people. I try to do a lot of field research. And when I'm talking to designers, architects, artists, peace builders, peace researchers, citizens, I'm always asking about the work that they're doing, but also potentially who else to speak with beyond them. And I begin to collect, even early on, 5 years out, this was 5 years of research, I begin to collect potential design works or projects that could be included in an exhibition. And then I start to sort. You do a lot of sorting.
And what is the criteria for this sorting?
All kinds of things. Is it viable in a physical exhibition? Does it, are there enough elements within it to actually tell a compelling story? It's not a book. We always say to each other, we're not displaying a book, which means you would have all this stuff on the wall. We're a design museum, so we want physical artifacts for display. We love people come to museums, and you could feel it after, because we opened kind of on the kind of the downswing of COVID here in New York, at least, maybe not around the world, but certainly here in New York, June 2022, and people were yearning to see, real items. But this is the thing, and there are other geography. I want to make sure I have a complete geographic spread. I also want to have different design disciplines represented. And I always kind of expand the idea of what is design. So I try to, so I included artists who think that were, from my perspective, were acting as designers, even though these were pieces of art. But the element that you asked, Santiago, is about the thing that I learned was all of these projects that I collected, a bunch of them, had this one concept that kept surfacing. And it's this idea of prefigurative intervention. And what I mean by that is where activists, designers are presenting alternatives to injustices they're experiencing and modeling their aims in advance of achieving them.
Can you tell us an example with a concrete object? Because I would like to envision that.
Absolutely. I'll talk about one from Greece, the island of Lesbos in Greece. So I traveled to this small island. It's one of the islands closest to Turkey, and people were fleeing Northern Africa across the Aegean Sea and ending up on the shores of this island in people's backyards. And this group of residents who lived on the island saw what was happening, and they people were coming 5,000 a day at the high point. They created a refugee camp in solidarity with the refugees, and this was an amazing thing. There was an existing day camp that was no longer being used. Some of the people that put this together that lived on the island had gone there when they were children, and they created this solidarity refugee camp. It wasn't a U.S.-based refugee camp. People from all over the world came and volunteered. And this was for women who were pregnant, or children traveling alone, or people who are infirm. And so this to me is this idea of modeling something in advance of the world actually achieving them. They created, they're working in solidarity, as if this is what we might have in the rest of the world. Eventually, I think it stayed open for 8 years, and eventually the government shut it down. But it was this beautiful, beautiful gesture that made quite a difference for people. And I actually included, to be able to tell this story, I included the Safe Passage workshop bags that were created at this solidarity camp. There was a designer who lived on the island, and she created this workshop. They got a bunch of sewing machines, and it wasn't just a workshop for the refugees, but it was also for the people who were living on the island, and where they could come together and work together, learn a new skill, create these amazing bags. And the bags were made out of recycled vests that people wore on the trip across the Aegean Sea. If you can imagine, they're on these little dinghies, these little boats. And when they got across, they just abandoned them. They didn't need them anymore. So they were made of this particular orange fabric that you find in safety vests. And they sent a real message to the rest of the world that all of us deserve safe passage. So it was a very powerful, on multiple levels. I like to tell a multitude of stories in the work that I select for the exhibition.
This interview is part of the list D&D in English, PAZ y Diseño, y Estados Unidos y Diseño. Santiago, you have the lucky situation that you visit this exhibition and even met Cynthia after the interview face to face. Do you want to tell us how it was? How is the exhibition from the visitor's perspective?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I not only had the chance to visit the exhibition, but I also had the chance to have a guided visit from Cynthia herself. So I must confess that the exhibition allows you to be immersed in many projects connected by one primary objective: to build a better future for everyone. The exhibition has a political taste, which makes it even more enjoyable. Also, the selection of projects that Cynthia made
allows the visitor to witness interventions from governments to grassroots organizations and even from anonymous or even subversive collectives. So every project is like an exhibition itself. So you must really spend some time if you want to go to this exhibition. One thing I like a lot was how the exhibition gave the opportunity to the visitors to interact and to reflect upon Design for Peace. These call to actions, as Cynthia mentioned, were embodied in places where visitors could intervene walls with messages or get postcards that they could send to anyone with powerful messages. And I think that's an exquisite way of displaying different kinds of projects, so people can get engaged in this exhibition. My favorite projects were Kitchen Conflict, Bullet Rock Series, and Casa Azul.
So we will probably invite the authors and interview them in following episodes, right?
Definitely, I think they would tell us a lot from their work.
Let's continue listening to Cynthia, that she has much more to tell us.
So there are very different roles that you have seen designers taking in these peace processes. Have you seen any designers working in the peace negotiations, for example?
So there is an architect who teaches at Harvard's Graduate School of Design who is very involved in trying to change how we address peacekeeping across the globe. Her name is Maltite Shashan. She just recently published a book, Blue. It was designed by the wonderful book designer Irma Boon at the Netherlands. But Blue is this multi-year research and design initiative that she's been working on for a number of years. And she seeks to incorporate urban design in planning of the UN peacekeeping camps. As you might be aware, a lot of the conflict that's taking place these days is often centered in cities or adjacent to cities. So that's an interesting development. What's interesting about this, generally these UN peacekeeping camps are closed forts for security reasons. And what she's proposing is designing them to be catalysts for local development. And so she's proposing that these bases can be transformed through a series of staged interventions, and they would provide better access to clean water, medical treatment, along with exchanges of knowledge and resources by creating dedicated facilities for the local civilians. And what's interesting about this is they would be built using, she proposes that they would be built using local techniques. So the base could be integrated into that particular location after the mission leaves. Often these bases are very temporary. It would leave a lasting legacy. It isn't just kind of outside in the academy that she's doing this. She actually convenes conversations at the United Nations with key stakeholders. And there's a real interest at the United Nations to incorporate this. You can see a new generation of peace builders thinking in different ways. They're trying to work across the silos that have developed over the years. I think this is very difficult to do, but there is a real desire to engage across the different silos of, development and housing and delivering services. So hopefully there will be some shift.
Yeah, I really like the term peace builders, because I think from my experience working as a designer with other disciplines, what I describe myself doing is building bridges from disciplines. So I was wondering, these builders, what do you think are the most challenging things that they have to encounter when, or what are the challenges that you have seen that they have encountered when developing these projects or these interventions?
So one of the things putting this exhibition together, I was trying to kind of change the discourse. There's so much research and conversation taking place around security and the making of war. There's not a lot of, there's limited research on peace. And so my hope was to create this broader conversation about opportunities to, especially from designers, because designers think in a very expansive way, have this ability, I think, we learn it, to collaborate across disciplines, across sectors. I think we can do that. We're wonderful researchers that take really what seems like very disparate elements and come up with an alternative and possibilities that others might not have seen before. And I have to tell you, there were some peacekeepers that came through from the UN, because we're in New York, we're adjacent to the just several blocks away from the UN headquarters. So different organizations came through to get inspired by some of the thinking that was on exhibit in the exhibition. So that was very a positive development. We always think about who the audience is, and that was one of the audiences we wanted to attract. So that was very encouraging. But I think what's always at the heart of this is conflict. If you're trying to establish peace, it's, we're all very different in this world. And how do you build those bridges that you're talking about? And acknowledge that there are people who might have very different views than you. And when you start to give voice, and I think it's critical, and a number of examples in the exhibition elevate voices that have been historically left out, which I think you need to have any kind of lasting peace. There are forces that don't want those voices to be heard, right? And so there are some real fundamentals that will and continue to, and that doesn't mean that we don't do it, but I think you have to. And that's just one of many things.
But do you think that there is like a missed opportunity? Because when I research something, or when I am working in a certain areas, I see that there is certain zones in which we don't enter, in which we are not still invited, in which designers we can still not enter. Do you, and one of the, when you mentioned at the beginning, one of the objectives or the aims of the museum is to expand the frontiers of design, no? To expand the understanding or the space, the design space. So what are these missing opportunities? Do you think that designers, we could enter into new spaces related to the piece that we are still not entering?
Yes. I'm not sure I could identify those this morning in specifics, but I do think sometimes, and I think this is an important lesson for all of us, is that I think we sometimes need to be invited into those spaces, right? We can't just appear and say, please let me in. I think, and that's where you have to build relationships. We talk about building bridges. It takes time, right? And and I think all of the really successful ones that might have some ability to, they talk about a durable piece, a piece that's long lasting. You really need to establish relationships over time. And I think over the last couple generations of designers, we've been beginning to see that, the importance of that, of building those relationships and continuing that.
So you talk also that always when you have an exhibition, you build a program around. So what type of program did you have around the Design and Peace exhibition?
Yes, we created a series of public programs. The first one coincided with our National Design Week in the fall of 22. And we invited this group, Beautiful Trouble, to create a workshop for the general public. They are included in the publication that we put together, and they have this Beautiful Trouble toolkit, and they go all over the world, creating confrontations with unjust practices, using all kinds of creative interventions. And so they invited the general public to come in and if they were part of a group or individually, to come in and brainstorm with them different ways that they could come up with creative ways to address issues in their own communities. Another one we just recently convened. It was online. It was a virtual public program where we talked about designing place, considering power. And here we brought together a visual artist from the Netherlands, Jonas Stahl, who creates these world embassies around the world. He recently collaborated with a group in northern Syria to create this people's parliament for this new type of stateless democracy. We had another group, John Lubin and Don Walensky, who discussed the work that they did in a Midwestern U.S. city, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, called Conflict Kitchen, where they serve food from countries that the U.S. was in conflict with. And then we also had Brian C. Lee Jr., who engaged the public all over the city of New Orleans to think about these new kind of monuments that would replace the Jim Crow-style Confederate monuments that were coming down in his city. And so he created this program called Paper Monuments, where people wrote or drew kind of these new type of histories that they wanted to bring forward within their city. And so we had this really engaged conversation about that, along with an upcoming one where we're going to talk about gender in design in May.
Okay, so the last question is about the future. You told us that you are going to build an exhibition on design and gender perspectives. But what's going to happen with the Design and Peace exhibition? Is it going to move around, or it's just going to disassemble?
So the exhibition here in New York, it closes this summer, so there's still time. So hopefully this podcast goes up well before August. The first week in August, it closes, and then it travels to the West Coast, to San Francisco, and it'll be on display at the Museum of Craft and Design October through February of next year. And we also hope to travel up beyond that, but I'm still in conversations with other locations.
I have one last question, and probably it's also related to the future and some like recommendations for future designers or peace builders. What would you recommend to them if they want to start this track, or if they want to start working on peace? What would you recommend to young peace builders?
That's a great question, Santiago. Well, I do think, I think there's things that they should read and get familiar with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, in particular Goal 16, which talks about peace, justice, and strong institutions. So get familiar with that. The Institute for Economics and Peace puts out a global peace index, but I think the one that designers should be looking at is their positive peace index. If you think there's this concept that in peace studies that there's negative peace, which is simply the absence of war, but there is this other idea of positive peace where there are all the aspects, all the building blocks that you require to make a more resilient and inclusive society. So you have durable peace, you need those requirements to, and so I would look at that work and begin to understand that work and see how that relates to design. And then something I think that's really fundamental, and I think it's probably for all human beings, not just young designers, but go back and reread the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's as valid today as it was when it was written in 1948. It was written by people across the globe, and I think it's one of the most powerful documents that we can all share. Certainly, there's other books. I think Beautiful Trouble, A Toolbox for a Revolution, has all kinds of creative ways to...
I love that book.
Yes.
I love it.
Yes.
I think it's amazing.
And the other one, and I think a young designers currently, the ones that are thinking about this prefigurative conversation, have some of their roots have come out of the writing by John Paul Lederach. He's an international peace activist and peace builder, and he writes about our moral imagination. And what he means by that is the capacity to recognize turning points and possibilities, to venture down unknown paths and create what does not yet exist, especially around conflict and peace. And so he's written a book, The Moral Imagination, The Art and Soul of Building Peace. And I think that would be, because we have this capacity to, we have a wonderful creativity, has this capacity to think beyond what is currently taking place. And I think we all have that capacity to tap into, and especially using design.
Thanks a lot for the interview.
In my opinion, it is absolutely great that the Design Museum recognizes the role of design in peacemaking. While most design museums around the world are still showing the most traditional design, these type of initiatives in which we can see the pioneering and thought-provoking design are key to open for the general public the idea of design. Opening up the frontiers of design needs to have on board the academics, the practitioners, the design communities, the networks, the museums, and also the journalists writing on design. We could only demonstrate the goods of design if we do it together with others that are part of the design ecosystem. We are now finalizing this series, and always when we arrive at the end, I love to talk about the future. One thing that we have planned is to have an online panel discussion in Colombia in October as part of a short course I will teach in the University of the Andes. But if we still want to research the topic, making interviews for this podcast, what are we missing? What can we do next?
Well, this is a very thought-provoking question. I think we need to motivate and keep motivating students and designers to work for the people. Peace has many dimensions, and we have had the chance to explore a couple of them in these interviews. We have gone through the social aspects of peace, the architectural aspects of peace, the political aspects, and even the symbolic aspects of peace. Design for peace also has a contextual factor connected to culture and society. So as long as we keep digging into these cultural and social factors, we will have the opportunity to meet incredible people behind powerful projects. And I think this is the way to move forward in order to continue designing for peace and peace building.
Thank you a lot for being my companion in this series.
It was a pleasure.
As always, the music of this podcast is by Antonio Zimmerman, sound design is by Julian Pereira. This podcast is published with Creative Commons license with attributions. This was Diseño y Diáspora. You can follow us on social media channels in YouTube, Instagram, or Twitter, or visit our website. Remember to recommend us and recommend our books. Stay tuned for more. We've got lots in store. Till next time, goodbye and design some more.